Welcome back, friends.
Always a pleasure.
So good to see you here. We are back for another episode of the Whole Life Vitality Podcast, where today we are going to talk about living in the gray.
In the gray. I was a black and white person growing up.
You know what? And I think that's why this topic is so profound for me, because I felt like I was a very black and white person growing up, but I think that that's a product of our upbringing.
Oh, absolutely. There was very heavy black and white programming. Everything was right or wrong. There was a right way, there was a wrong way. And we had to always be in the right way.
Yes, potentially get in trouble.
There were so many severe consequences for not being in the right way.
I feel like I lived my life always afraid of getting in trouble.
Interesting.
Like, I was going to get caught. I was going to get found. I was going to get in trouble. And I'm like, what was actually going to happen?
How's that imposter syndrome working out for you?
Right? Seriously, let me tell you.
Be found out.
Woo.
Yeah.
And it is something that specifically, imposter syndrome, something still that I struggle with.
Right. Yeah, me
And
too.
I have to tell myself, like, no, I've done the things. Like, I have learned this. I have worked on this.
I can quantify my successes, and they are real.
Yes, exactly. So I want to talk to you today about living in the gray, because in the gray, there is grace. I have struggled, I would say, as long as I can remember, with trying to find balance in things, because I'm like, okay, if things are right or wrong, then if I'm doing them just right, then everything will always be balanced.
How do you balance doing the wrong with the right?
Not that. But like, if I'm doing the right things, then my scales will balance, because I can handle my family, and I can handle my friends, and I can handle my job.
Because there's a right way to live and be happy.
If you know, you know, guys. It's a song that we grew up singing in our lovely...
Culty life.
Yes, that's the one.
In the pre-cult life.
And in order to maintain that happiness, in order to continue to do the right thing and live just the right way, then I needed to have balance in all these aspects of my life. If I wasn't actively progressing towards something that was the right thing and going to be great and better and make me happier and help the people around me and care for my family and plan the balanced meals and be successful at work and do all of these things, then I wasn't actually, quote unquote, balancing or doing the right thing.
It's crazy to think you could be doing so much in each of those areas, but if you weren't doing enough, you were failing overall.
And that's where we run into the problem.
Yeah.
And so I actually was talking to a friend of mine once who said, I was like, I'm just really, really struggling with balance. And she said to me, well, balance is an illusion. She's like, that's not real. You can't actually have balance. And it just threw me.
Shook
like,
you.
Rocked my world. Because,
Wait, do you think she was right?
Because I was, in that moment, I was like, that's not true. This was someone who I really respected. Anytime someone tells me something, especially something that really hits me like that, then I try to sit with it and think, okay, is there truth in that? Like, where am I presenting myself, or how am I living that is contrary to this?
Right.
So then I sat with it for a bit and realized that you can't have the lights on and the lights off at the same time.
Okay.
And you can't have it in the middle.
I mean, you could have a dimmer switch.
And so I was like, so that's not balanced. I can't really spend the day with my husband and spend the day working all day long and put 100% of my attention into both those things. Like, so that can't be balanced. So then what am I looking for as far as balance?
And that's a powerful question all itself.
Right.
What were you looking for?
What was I looking for? And in order to find, quote unquote, balance in your life, you need to know what you want. You need to know what you value.
Well, because it's going to be a balance of competing priorities, right?
Exactly.
Say, lining up the things that are most important to you and giving enough to each of those priorities. Is that what I'm understanding? All right.
Right. And that priority is going to shift maybe daily, maybe multiple times a day.
You know, there may be some top priorities that you maintain over time. Like, it's probably really important to you to make sure that your children are okay.
Oh, yeah.
That one stays.
They're at the top of my list for sure.
Yeah, that one stays at the top. Mm-hmm. And you can probably count on one hand the number of times something was more important than that.
Yep.
So there will be priorities that shift, but I'm sure there are going to be priorities that stay at the top just because they're so important.
We've been adulting for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Far enough into our adult years that we've seen friends get married and get divorced, maybe more than once. We've
Yeah.
seen people age and get sick and pass away. We've seen lots of things begin to shift. And even within that experience, that starts to shift my perspective of what's important. Because people who align their priorities with what they want are maybe focused on that one thing. But if you're not prioritizing your health, you're more likely to get sick. If you're not prioritizing your marriage, you're more likely to get divorced. If you're not prioritizing your relationships with your children, you're more likely to have them grow up and then not have a relationship with you.
There are risks in deprioritization.
Exactly. And so you say, well, it just makes sense to always have your children at the top of that list because that's where we prioritize.
That's important to me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so figuring out what you want.
My career might suffer because my children are so important to me. But, at the end of my life, I'd rather be tight with my kids.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
How does it tie into grade? Okay. So knowing your priorities, right? If you have all of the things figured out that you want, which, let's be fair, is going to take some introspection.
What if you have too many things?
Which one do you want first, Adam?
That's the
so
question.
Many questions.
Yeah. How do you decide? When you have too many high priorities?
Okay. So my personal opinion, I think that you can have 3 things at the top of your priority list and do them well. I think once you get past 3, then you can assume they're just not going to get as much of your attention. I think that those top 3. And for me, those top 3 kind of move around a little bit. But they vary because some days I'm like, I can give my husband that number 1 spot and I can give him that number 1 spot for most of the day, or I can give my children that number 1 spot, or I can give my job that number 1 spot, and they kind of rotate. I can give my friends that number 1 spot. But those 5 or 6 or 7 things that I think are really important on any given day, I can do 3 of them really well.
Okay, cool.
And
that's good awareness.
Figuring out what those things are for you. Maybe give yourself 5 spots. Maybe give yourself 10 spots.
With 1.
What things are important to you?
What's top priority?
If I'm going to prioritize the quality time with my children, I'm probably not going to care if my house is a mess. There are some days that having a clean house is higher on the priority list.
I heard, so when Zoe and I first got married, clean house was a very high priority for us.
Yeah.
And someone brought up at one point that they were more interested in encouraging creativity than they were in maintaining cleanliness. And that was a balance I hadn't considered before.
Yeah.
That too much cleanliness stifles creativity, and creativity thrives in an area that can get messy. Is that gray? Okay,
Yes.
cool.
So finding the space in between when you know your priorities, and then you're like, okay, with my children, I want to have this beautiful day with them. I want to have everything just so. And I plan what I think is going to be the perfect day.
Trying to make core memories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if I follow that perfect day to a T, am so rigid about how the day has to go, it's not actually going to be fun for any of us.
Oh, it's going to be a core memory.
It's just not in a good way.
Not in a good way. That's going to be the day that your kids look back to and they're like, my mom was so rigid.
Remember when mom tried to be fun? Sucked.
She planned out the most fun.
But if you allowed some fluidity in the space, and so I'm like, for me, that would be all or nothing thinking. That would be black and white thinking. The day will only be perfect if XYZ all happens just in this way and nothing else steps in to mess that up. That would be black and white thinking.
Nothing can interfere.
Nothing can interfere.
Yeah.
But if I find the fluidity in that gray space of saying, everything is changing all the time. If I walk out my door and I walk down the street and then I come back and then I walk down the street again, things are going to have changed.
Right.
Like the wind will blow leaves around, or a different person will be walking down the street, or a dog will walk by, or the
different smells, different
birds,
sights,
exactly,
different people.
The only constant in your life is change. And if you're so rigid in your thinking of how things have to be, there's no space to appreciate that gray area.
Okay. All right. So now I have to ask, because when we were young and everything was black and white, morality was a huge part of that. There were correct morals and there were sins. How does your gray play into morality now?
Thank you.
I'm putting it right on you.
When I was a child, when I was a teenager, even if something that I had been told was inappropriate in any way, then I would shame myself.
Say you saw something and you thought, I could just take it.
Yeah. Or someone made me angry and I thought a 4-letter word.
Oh, fuck.
Like,
Yeah, bleep that.
then I would feel shame
Yeah.
because I am a bad person.
Were.
Or I was. Because in that moment.
In the black and white world.
In that black and white moment, I am a bad person. It wasn't until I was an adult, gosh, I would say maybe even like in the last decade, that I really understood the difference between guilt and shame. Mm-hmm. Guilt being, oh, I did something that I don't feel great about.
Remorse.
That I need to apologize for.
Yeah.
And shame being, I did something that I am not happy about.
Self-flagellate.
It's because I'm a horrible person. It's because
Yeah.
I am inherently evil and I could never be great and I can never be a good person.
Shame's
because
pretty
I do,
painful.
Because I do bad things.
Yeah.
It is a very powerful tool.
Easy to use as a destructive hammer.
And that I think is the only way that it can be used. I don't think that there is a productive way to
I haven't found one yet.
No, to have shame present in any situation.
Yeah.
So for me, when I would have those thoughts or those experiences, then I would feel shame. And as an adult, my thinking is just so much more nuanced than that. As an adult, then morally, I would say fundamentally, I still have a lot of the same values, or at least I don't want to kill anybody.
I haven't seen you kill anybody.
I don't plan to ever. And sometimes when I think about, people dying or animals dying or, things like that, it makes me really sad.
From that one.
That's not a me thing.
Yeah.
And so fundamentally, I feel like I have a lot of the same morals, but the way that I process them are different.
And the way, I imagine that you don't shame yourself anymore.
I think that it would be too black and white of my thinking to say I never. And that's the type of terminology that I try to stay away from.
Always
now.
and nevers.
The world doesn't function in
Nothing
absolute. And so, I do still shame myself, and often over things that are just completely insignificant.
It's crazy how it just bubbles up unbidden.
Yes.
It's the part of you that you're not actively controlling that
Right.
still goes back to shame.
Yep.
Yeah.
And how much of that is just human beings.
Infantile puritanical beliefs, man.
So I would love to know, friends, is that something that you've experienced? Like the living with that shame, is that something that you've experienced regularly? Is that something you still struggle with? Is that something you grew up with?
All right, so I have to know then, do you support going gray?
Going gray.
Going gray.
Like in my hair.
No, of course not.
In my beard.
I don't think you should have a beard.
I do like the little bit of gray in
Yeah,
your
you
beard.
like that
It's very
little bit of gray.
distinguished looking.
Yeah.
Isn't that nice to be a man and have your gray be distinguished?
Great,
That's
awesome.
so nice. I started calling my grays highlights because I'm like, they're the highlights I don't have to pay for. Yeah.
Because everything was so high stress and so high tension, it was like everything had to be rigid and had to be a certain way. And when I started realizing that life is so much bigger and more broad and more flexible and more nuanced, things got easier.
There's so much freedom in that space of
Right.
recognizing that there can be all of this fluidity. Like anything can happen. And that doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing.
No.
Like I would have a panic attack because plans got changed.
Right.
And I'm like, wait, no, I had thought out this whole process.
I had the right way.
I had the right way. I knew how it was all going to go down, and I knew how I was going to respond, and I knew what was going to happen, and I knew that I couldn't possibly get in trouble or do anything bad within this space. And then you changed it or try to live with it on the fly.
Or pull it back to the shape of what I know is right.
Right. So much mental gymnastics. All of that thinking, that the trauma response of things change and I'm freaking out it's a PTSD trauma response. By the way, I don't know if you knew that or friends knew that, but that is not ideal, healthy thinking.
Wait, so when I thought it was my superpower, what was I doing? It wasn't actually my superpower?
I think that it was a coping mechanism.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
My coping mechanisms are my superpowers.
I think that we get so good, especially in a high stress environment, we get so good at perfecting how we are going to respond, get so hyper vigilant that it turns into something that we've perfected. What do they say? It takes 10,000 hours to make a master. Practice something for
Malcolm Gladwell and Blink.
That's right. 10,000 hours of practicing something to become a master. Good job.
No, I think we do practice coping mechanisms pretty often.
And even more so when your upbringing is in kind of a higher stress environment, because so much of your core understanding is that. And then you spend your adult life trying to relearn how to exist in the space in between.
The space in between is the gray.
The space in between is the gray. The space in between is the more nuanced space where I was in a season where I was really focused on losing weight, and the scale was my best friend or my nemesis, depending on what it said. So I would get on the scale and I would tell myself, well, the scale is always going to move. It's never going to stay the same. So I want it to always be moving in the direction that I want it to move. This was not a healthy space for me.
That's a hard one.
Not a healthy season. And it wasn't until years later when I examined that from a more curious standpoint and thought, well, I wasn't wrong.
Man, I love Ted Lasso.
I know, right?
I knew you went there.
Yep.
You said curious, and I was like, Ted Lasso,
That's
baby.
the one. It wasn't until I examined it from that space where I thought, I wasn't wrong.
Right.
Things are always changing.
Right.
Like your body is always changing. When I was seeing that scale, I was seeing good and bad. It's either going up, which is bad, or down, which is good.
Right.
I was either doing things right or I was doing things wrong. I was either going to get it all the way amazing and get everything I wanted, or I was going to die a failure. There was no space in between.
Wow. And no room for you to be in an in-between state.
Right.
Okay, so wait, what's it like now, stepping on the scale?
I do it a lot less frequently.
Why?
I've made a deal with myself that if I can get on the scale and feel the same way about myself, regardless of what the scale says to me, then I'm allowed to get on the scale.
Interesting.
And if I can't, then I don't need to get on the scale.
So the scale doesn't change whether I'm pleased with myself or not.
Right.
Okay.
If I love myself, no matter what that scale says, if I get on the scale and I know if it says I'm a pound down, then I'm going to feel better about myself. I don't need to get on the scale.
That's how I am with my debt, you know? I look at my student loans and I'm like, I can only look at them if it's not going to hurt me.
See? There are lots of times when I can get on the scale and just see it as a unit of measurement. And if it is just that and not somehow something that I did to make myself succeed or fail, if it's just a unit of measurement, then it's fine. A scale is just a tool.
A meal doesn't have to be all or nothing. It can just
Right.
be food.
It can just be food. And when things become just what they are and not carrying the weight of expectation or shame, then they're
The
just what they
combined
are.
weight of an ideology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then a cookie is just a cookie.
Well, not everything has to be heavy.
Yeah.
Not everything has to be deterministic. Not everything has to be the determining factor in our success or failure. Some things are literally just living.
I was struggling with something in a friendship once, and I came to you and we were talking about it, and you said to me, this isn't the thing that breaks you. This isn't the thing that breaks the situation or the relationship or whatever. And it was just really profound for me because you're like, there are lots of things are going to happen, but this is not the thing that breaks.
This is not the thing that breaks.
And I'm like, this is not the black and white side of either you have a friendship or you don't. You're like, this is just a season.
It's indigestion, man.
Recognize things for what they are. And that is what life is, living in this gray. And that is how you find balance. Because if you're not shaming yourself for not doing everything perfectly all the time, then you have room to do things well when you have space for them.
So how would someone know if they were caught up in over-pressurizing situations? How would someone tip themselves off if they were looking at things with too much pressure, black and white, all or nothing?
Are you shaming yourself?
Oh,
Are you saying I'm a bad parent or I'm a bad human or I am stupid or I'm a failure or, shaming yourself? I am inherently awful because XYZ.
yeah.
And if you are doing that, then you're living in the black and white.
Okay. And then how does someone take the first step from that black and white to the gray?
Finding the things that you feel good about. Stop shaming yourself by saying, okay, maybe I am not perfect. Let's just say that. You're not. Nobody is, because we're not black and white. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's awful. Like, nobody's a complete failure and nobody's completely perfect. You're not completely anything.
I think if statistically somewhere in some universe monkeys are writing a dictionary, there must be some perfect someone somewhere too, right?
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. What? That is so funny. Okay.
Sorry, keep going.
So if nobody's completely perfect and nobody is a complete failure, then recognizing maybe I didn't do that the way I wanted to, or the way I would like to. Maybe I didn't like that outcome, but what can I do differently? Or what would I have changed? Or where am I doing things well? Or, if you're living in this space where you've put yourself so high up on this pedestal that you're afraid to take any steps because you're like, no, I have to be perfect all the time, then that's not healthy either. Dare I say, just as damaging as living in the shame, because any little misstep from that perfection means that you're a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And so finding the space to give yourself grace to not be perfect. And that means not be perfectly failing either. Not be perfectly shameful, because either way you're making yourself all one thing, and none of us are completely one thing. There's
Sure.
so many aspects to every person.
We're multidimensional.
We're all very nuanced.
If we had had this conversation with 17-year-old me, I would have thought that we were watered down, diluted versions of what we could have been, and that we were talking ourselves out of putting in enough effort to be exceptional. What would you say to someone who says that this is a middling life and that it's going to lack exceptionalism because it's too nuanced? It's not pushing hard enough. Yeah. It's not doing enough.
Well, your 17-year-old self was
Inexperienced, obviously.
so afraid of not existing in that perfect space,
Right.
because they had been told that there was only one way to be. There was only one way to exist. Exactly. Yeah. And even within that space of, I have to give 100%, 100% of the time.
Do you remember Bedazzled?
Because there's so much fear.
With Brendan Fraser?
Yes.
Yeah, I just feel like we really gave 110% and we just played 110% of the time.
Great. That movie was so ridiculous. I was about to call it a great movie. That would be false advertising, guys. It was a ridiculous movie.
Bedazzled.
But it was fun. It was fun. But that's a trauma response.
Right.
If you're not going 100% of the time, then you're going to fail. Then you're never going to get what you want.
It's interesting to think of how much people are pushed by trauma responses.
Yeah.
Do you feel like if someone's trauma responses were removed, they would accomplish less?
No.
You don't think that their trauma responses are part of their superpower?
I think it's just a coping mechanism. I think it's a way to help you feel safe. But if people felt safe, if they felt safe and loved, then I think that it would just be a different driving force. And I think that force of feeling safe and feeling loved and feeling like you aren't going to mess anything up. You're not going to mess things up because you can just try and maybe fail forward. Like, oh, I tried and I didn't quite get there. And so it's okay. I'm just going to try again. I'm going to try again. I'm going to try again. Right. There's joy in that. It's like shaming a toddler for not being able to walk.
So maybe part of what you accomplish is joy.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I'm just like, I feel like my brain is doing 100 things right now because I'm seeing this world where everyone's trauma responses are removed and people are just existing together, almost like this utopian society. It's all fictional.
Not real, man.
It's all fictional, I know, but that's what's happening in my brain right now. But if we were just encouraging of each other because we weren't afraid that someone else would do it better, which would make us look bad. Or if we just took the encouragement for ourselves because we were like, that's okay. I can just keep trying. I can just keep moving forward. I think a lot more people would be driven to try things or experience things that they had never done before because they wouldn't be afraid of failing.
Right.
I think so.
Curiosity would rule the day. I think there's an expectation that if we remove struggle, what finds its way into our lives is curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd be interested to see if that holds true because I think it's valuable.
I think that it's valid. I think that in the world that we live in America here, with a whole lot of first world problems, you start seeing all these things creep up to the surface where we have gotten curious. We're talking about mental health, not struggling to survive physically. And so we're looking at the different aspects of, okay, well, now I'm curious. Like, why do I feel this way? How could I feel differently? And asking those questions. I mean, even when talking about sexual orientation, if we were all just struggling to survive, there wouldn't be space to have these conversations that
Sure.
we're having. I think that's pretty cool.
That there's room.
I think it's pretty cool that there's room for
And there
people to
is.
feel like they can
I mean,
express themselves
we're
in
not
different
coming
ways.
home from jobs so tired that we can't think.
Right.
We have room to think. Yeah.
And that, I think, is a huge luxury.
Oh, it absolutely is. And I think it's a luxury that we should chase.
Finding balance in your lives, friends, starts with first figuring out what you want.
Maybe embrace that gray,
Yeah.
you know,
Yep.
look to the middle,
Yep.
find moderation,
Yep.
temperance.
Once you figure out what you want, where is the fluidity in this space?
What's in the way? What
Yeah.
hard and fast rules am I still holding on to that are actually in the way of fluidity
Yep.
and motion and movement? Because there is a natural flow to our lives. And if we tap into it, we can move. And it takes less effort. We can discover the things that are most important to us and chase them
Yep.
and more rewarding.
And so much more rewarding. The joy that you get out of doing what you want to or what you love to do is just so much nicer than just trudging through what you have to do.
Yeah. And you probably find it on the other side of boredom.
Yeah, probably. Boredom can be so productive.
I mean, it really moves you to think about what you want.
Yep, lots of creative juices flow out of boredom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to be bored for a moment in order to find them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Man, that's a good podcast for another day.
Right. We'll tap into that.
Make sure you subscribe, follow, hit the bell, keep showing up, friends, share it with friends. We just love hanging out with you here, and also would love to hear from you. If you agree, if you disagree, if this is something you're struggling with and you want to talk about it, we are definitely here for you.
Feel free to leave that angry comment.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes, because there is always stuff for us to learn as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. There's room. Thank you, friends.
We'll see you next time.